I look at fitness as things that we can measure within some sort of semblance of objective measures. Conditioning is using fitness to accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish.
Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences in strength, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'm Michael Krukowski, host of the Strength Connection, and I'm so grateful that you can join me today. So in these episodes, I connect with some of the most inspiring and successful individuals to chop it up and learn from true life experiences that have helped them become who they are, the strongest versions of themselves. One of the greatest ways I've always learned the most important lessons is through stories. We all have them, and they make us who we are. So let's dive in. Here we go. Joel Jamieson needs little to no introduction in the strength and conditioning world. He is the go-to leader in conditioning training, developing some of the most effective programs in the world, including 8 Weeks Out, Metamorphosis, Morpheus, and the Certified Conditioning Coach program. His knowledge and insights developed over the past 15 years is of the highest level, and it was an absolute honor to have him come on and talk about the most important factors of conditioning training. All right, so with that, let's get right to it. But before we do, please show your support for the podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate wherever you're listening, and also on our YouTube channel, The Strength Connection. Your support means everything to me. I sincerely appreciate you for it. All right, thank you very much. Let's get on with the show. All right, welcome back, everybody. Joel Jamieson, great to meet you. It's a really honor to have you on, so I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump on and talk some conditioning, recovery, whatever it is that your listeners want to hear about.
Yeah, we'll dive into quite a few stuff. I got a chance to. I've followed you for a while, and the content that you put. You're one of the best on conditioning, specifically of making complex things very simple for not just coaches, but really anybody that's following work, which is like a really challenging thing to do. But the amount of content and information that you've put out is just so amazing for coaches. So listeners, I'll talk directly. If you haven't gone to 8weeksout.com yet, there's like 40 pages of articles out there on all different types of stuff on conditioning. That is just a huge resource. And I've been diving into it. So I'm really pumped to chat. So if I could bring you back though to kind of the origins a bit. I mean, you've been in this for a long time. What first originally got you into coaching?
Yeah, I'm kind of one of those typical coaches who was an athlete that wasn't good enough to go to the next level, and always enjoyed the training process. And I've been lifting weights since I was an early teenager, I think because my brother was bigger and stronger than me, and I didn't want that to be the case. And he had this, literally the old school, your older listeners remember, there's this weight set. It was just these plastic these plastic plates filled with sand.
Filled with sand, right?
It's kind of it's filled with sand, these like hollow tubes that you would slide these sand-filled plates onto. And so when he wasn't home, I would sneak in and start lifting weights to try to get bigger than he was. And kind of, as luck would have it, I guess not his luck, but mine, he dislocated his elbow skiing with me. And so he was out for about 6 or 8 months, and he couldn't lift. And that coincided perfectly when I was just catching my stride, and testosterone was starting to course through my veins. And by the time he was back to lifting weights with me, I was significantly stronger, and he couldn't keep up, and I was bigger than him. And so our dynamic changed after that. He wasn't quite the bully that he was before that.
It's like the NASCAR driver that's flying past the guy in the pit stop.
Yeah, and we have different fathers, and he's 5'11", and I was also 6'2", and it just kind of all worked in my favor. So I always loved training. I always loved the process. I remember walking to the local store to get magazines on training, and I just really loved the whole thing. And then actually, interestingly enough, a guy named Bill Gillespie, who turned out to be really my first mentor in the sport, he came to my high school when I was a senior in high school, and I was captain of the football team, and I had visions of playing in college, which I did briefly at the University of Washington, where he was. And he passed out this training program, and I looked at this thing, and I was like, what in the hell is this? Because my whole exposure to lifting had been bodybuilding, right? It had been the muscle mags and Joe Weider and, all this sort of traditional bodybuilding split stuff, arms and bis, tris, legs, these really just normal bodybuilding split. And what he handed me in this program, I was like, this looks nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. It was the first strength and conditioning program. It was such a departure from what I'd been used to reading and doing. And it just really piqued my interest. And then I went to the University of Washington, played football for a year there. Bill was a strength coach there, and I was exposed to, again, this very different realm of lifting. And after I basically realized I wasn't going to go pro by any stretch, and I had 3 concussions and just decided to hang up the football end, I still really loved the training side and kept educating myself, and asked Bill if I could come down and intern and be part of that weight room. And that was really the start of it. And, I just have always loved the process of learning about how to improve. I think I'm impatient, so I want to learn how to improve as fast as possible and not be spending hours and days and weeks and months not getting any better. So it's just been part of that journey of educating myself and then taking the education and helping other people learn from what I've learned.
Yeah. What was the biggest difference of those strength and conditioning programs versus what you were doing? Was it like the movements, or was it more like how you felt after?
It was honestly, it was a split. Like, I was so used to this idea of like arms, chest, back, legs, whatever, like this traditional bodybuilding split where everything was built on body parts.
Yep.
And this was not that. It was, a traditional, more, strength conditioning where I couldn't figure out like, okay, what is this day? Cause I was doing clean and press and jerks and, totally different exercises and our total body every day. Like he's squatting 3 times a week. Like it was such a different way of looking at training than just body part splits. And, it was my first exposure to explosive lifting and jump plyometric type work and sprinting in there. Like it was just such a different thing than going in and cranking out bis and tris and chest, right? It was a very different approach that I loved it because it was such a different thing.
Yeah.
But I was just, my eyes were open to this whole other world. And then fortunately, in college, my mom worked for American Airlines. And so I could travel on her passes for free. And so once I kind of caught that bug of like, I just want to learn, I started traveling and going to as many workshops and internships and just anyone I could learn from, I would travel to. And I spent 3 days on the floor of Mel Siff's house. For your listeners who know Mel Siff was, or at Super Training, and did a bunch of stuff in New York with different coaches out there, and just kind of went around. And anybody, like I said, that would help me, I would go out and try to learn from as much as I could. So I kind of soaked it up like a sponge, and I take it back to UW, and Bill and I would sit around and talk strength. And he was a competitive power lifter and world record holder, multi-time world record holder. And we'd just sit around and theorize about different strategies for his lifts to go up and the players. And it was awesome. It was a lot of fun, but that was really where I got started.
Yeah. It's amazing those ideas that come up just from kind of after the gym setting talks of just talking through stuff and saying, could this work or not? I think so many coaches who have been in the game for a while, you kind of have that moment of going from the aesthetic to the performance-based training. For me, I remember getting into like functional training or total body type training, athletic training. The conditioning was such a difference. I thought I was in good shape from doing kind of aesthetic splits. Then all of a sudden went into some power training, and all of a sudden you're sucking wind after like 5 minutes. It's kind of a real come to Jesus moment at that.
It is, and that's actually an important thing to talk about for a second, not to sidetrack, but there's been a big push, I guess, in recent years that strength training is, the best form of cardio if you just lift faster and do more reps and have shorter rest. And like, really, it's not. I mean, it doesn't take much to prove that. You can take a bodybuilder or a powerlifter or Olympic weightlifter and have them go run. Like, they don't last long. And there's a reason for that, because it's a very different thing to lift weights, whether it's fast or slow or long or short, and to do traditional cardiovascular type exercise. They're very different demands. They impact the body very differently, and they're different tools. So it's important to just recognize that, whatever your goal is, you choose the right tool for the job. And if you want to be bigger, stronger, faster, more explosive and build muscle, then you need to lift a bunch of weights for that. If you want to improve your cardiovascular endurance and fitness and your ability to maintain that power, that force and power, you have to do traditional cardiovascular type training and metabolic training. You can't use weights as a end all be all, do everything I need to do. And with one tool, you need a broader spectrum than that.
Yeah, it is. And being someone who I dove so deep into strength, and I love strength training. And when you talk about conditioning, it's a very lateral movement over to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to lift these weights faster. Maybe that'll work. And it's almost kind of wishful thinking of, can I stay in my lane while kind of going and just adding another little, piece of pavement on the side, so I don't have to completely, do something different than what I don't know. Comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I would have kind of gone down that same path indefinitely, but I opened a gym in 2003. And that gym happened to be next to a gym called AMC Pancration, which I didn't know this at the time, but it was the longest running MMA gym in the US, and now it is the world. It's been open since the mid 90s purely for MMA. And so very early on, I had these fighters coming over and asking me to train them for fights. And then, at that point I was a strength guy. And so my first inclination was like, yeah, of course I can train you. And so I test them and I look at their numbers, like they can't do 2 pull-ups, like they can't squat their body weight. I'm like, oh my God, these guys are so weak, right? I'm just thinking in my head, like, this is going to be a cakewalk. I just need to get them really strong and they're going to go out and they're going to crush people. And, I started doing that. I started just lifting a bunch of heavy weights with them. And then I said, well, I really need to understand the sport a bit better because these guys are training for in front of 70,000 people in Japan and they're fighting the UFC. Like these are high level guys. If I'm going to help them, I need to understand the sport. So I went over to train with them myself. And I literally at the time thought I was going to just manhandle them because at the time I was 230, 240. I was 50 pounds bigger than they were. I was squatting 500 something pounds, benching 400 pounds. I was like, I'm going to crush these guys. And, for about 30 seconds, I could manhandle them for literally 20 or 30 seconds. And then I was just done. I was so gassed out. I couldn't do anything. And, I played football, so I understood fatigue, but football is 8 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, and you get a break, right? So this was 5 minutes and, I was done in a few seconds and they were just rolling me up like a pretzel despite weighing 50, 60 pounds less than me. And I went, holy shit, there's a whole other aspect to this that I need to understand better because if I don't, I'm not going to help these guys because I'm obviously way stronger than them. It's doing me absolutely no good because I'm so gassed I can't even move my arm, let alone fight back. And so that was really my holy shit. I need to dig in here because I've obviously not learned enough about conditioning and my ideas are completely wrong that more strength is going to solve their conditioning problem. Yeah. And really that was, a very big change in my thought process and my own journey to become the conditioning guy. Cause I was like most strength coaches, like you just mentioned, I wanted to lift weights and I wanted to lift more weights. And I really didn't enjoy the conditioning side. I didn't like running. It wasn't my side of the game. And it was probably the furthest thing from my side of the game. So it was a big change, but I realized pretty quickly I had to help these guys train and get better and I needed to learn. And that was really what kicked off that whole side of the journey to where I'm at today. So it was out of necessity. And I wish I could have said I had the foresight that it was going to play such a big role, but it was just like, I realized how little I knew and had to figure out how to change that.
Yeah. How long were you already a coach by the time this happened when you started working with the MMA guys and realized I needed to understand more?
Yeah, probably so. The University of Washington was like late 90s, early 2000. The gym was 2003. So probably a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. But like most of my work before that had been football. So I worked in the weight room with Bill, University of Washington. Then went to the Seahawks, interned there for a year, then immediately opened my gym. So a couple of years really of being around football athletes. And that was kind of my thought was I wanted to continue football athletic training or strength conditioning. And then I realized pretty quickly once I opened my gym, like it was a lot harder road than I thought because most high school football players, their teams have strength coaches, they have weight rooms at the gym, their teams give them programs. So, ironically enough, volleyball and some other sports ended up being the high school area I trained a lot with. And then combat sports obviously became their second huge area. So sports that I would never have imagined were going to be my career ended up being 90% of what I was doing, high school volleyball players and some other sports and combat athletes. And, it was a big transition from where I thought I was going to go, but I'm glad that I did because, conditioning is such an important element in all these different areas. And if I had just kind of stuck to football, I probably would have just kept doing what I was doing and wouldn't have learned all the different facets of this that I've had to dive into over the years.
Yeah. So when you really started diving like headfirst into conditioning on there, was there already a lot of, was there some good resources already out there, or was it much more kind of wild, wild west where it was hard to find good information? I know like really in the last 15 years in many different facets, things have evolved so much with the amount of information that we've been able to gather. What was some of the early resources of learning conditioning?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know that there was a whole lot. There's still, I don't know, there's a whole lot out there aside from what I'm trying to do on the conditioning side. There's physiology textbooks, right? So you can read all you want about energy systems and you can dive into the science and research, but there was very little practical, like here's how you actually do something, or more importantly, here's why you do it and what it's going to accomplish. When I talked to Martin Rooney, because he was another strength coach who'd spent a lot of time working with combat athletes. He had written a book. So I talked to him just to kind of understand what he was doing from a strength conditioning provider perspective. And then I did dive into textbooks to try to understand them. I talked to some coaches I knew that were on the Eastern European, Russian track and field event, like side of things, and asked for them for some resources, and I found some old kind of European, Russian, not Ukraine, but German, and kind of these different old school texts I had translated by some friends, and just kind of dug into as best as I could. At the same time, I should probably give you the adjunct story. I was introduced to HRV, or heart rate variability, kind of around the same time as I started at the University of Washington, the Seahawks, late 90s, early 2000s. So 20 years before anyone knew what HRV was. Right. And so that also allowed me to measure a lot of what was happening. It really accelerated my learning curve, because as I was experimenting, a lot of it was literally experimenting. It was like, okay, I read about this method that I found in this obscure Soviet textbook. Like, let's try this and let's see what happens. And as I was able to do that, I was able to look at HRV, and HRV gives you two kind of big things. One, in the short term, it looks at how much stress your body's under and how well it's recovering and where it's directing its energy resources. But then two, changes in HRV up over time, your average, is a really good indication that your aerobic system is improving and your cardiovascular fitness is getting better. So I would, be able to see this with high level fighters and high school athletes and kind of weekend warriors and executives and these different people I was training. So I had a measuring stick, and I really got deep into heart rate training as part of this journey, because, really, if you're lifting weights, if the weight's getting heavier, can you lift more weight? Can you lift more reps? Like, the answer, whether or not you're getting stronger. No one's like, am I getting stronger? Like, I don't know. No, you can tell you're either lifting more weight or you're not. But, the cardiovascular and the conditioning side, people don't have a great barometer. Like, I feel more fit, but am I more fit? Like, they don't always know whether or not their conditioning is getting better until they go out and compete. And then either they perform well or they don't, and they're not really sure kind of what the process was to drive it. And so I really got down the heart rate training, HRV, rabbit hole, as trying to understand, okay, is what I'm doing actually working? I don't want to wait until someone goes out to a fight and to find out if the program was what they needed. And if they go out and they gas out and they're like, oh, whoops, no, I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted to have a measuring stick as I was training them, as we got closer and closer to a fight. Like, is their conditioning actually improving? And you need heart rate monitoring for that, because heart rate monitoring is a gauge of someone's volume intensity and how much power they're able to generate and work they're able to do at different heart rates. Tells you whether or not they're getting better and how quickly their heart rate comes down. Does a lot of the same thing in their resting heart rate. So I dove really deep into that side of things, and there wasn't a ton of great resources in that either, to be honest. So in some sense that was good, because it forced me to experiment and to study and learn and just try a bunch of things and figure it out myself over the years. And that process was cumbersome and time consuming, but it also really forced me to learn and not just kind of rely on what somebody else had done and copy them. I had to actually go out and figure it out.
Right. Do you think that there was almost a lag in kind of some of the conditioning resources because of like that barrier of measurement? As you said, like, it's very objective with strength. Like, if you lifted 200 and next week you lifted 250, okay, like that's objective. You can see that, but there's just some more things that you need to understand or track that might be just take a little bit more energy or effort to understand it. It's a little bit more subjective. Do you think that's one of the causes why there wasn't as much information on conditioning? Even like, I think speed training might be very similar to that. I have a friend who's a speed coach in the UK who said there's not a lot of very subjective ways to measure, speed as they would like strength. Is that kind of similar with conditioning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely part of it. I think, if you can't measure it quickly or easily, or you don't know how to measure it, it's a lot harder, like you said, to know whether or not it's improving. I think also it just does come down to the fact that I would say strength coaches and, people, personal trainers, whatever field of the fitness realm they're in, they're inherently strength biased. I mean, I was one of them. Most people in this field start out lifting weights and they love lifting weights, and they went down the same path I went down of like, I want to get stronger. I want to be aesthetically bigger and leaner. And like, they come from that background, and that's what they enjoy doing themselves. And so unless they ended up, coming from an endurance athlete or some sort of sport background that required a lot of conditioning, they just tend to really like lifting weights and gravitate towards it. And so they're less likely to dive into the other side, because it is more, it's a big change, to go from, okay, I'm going to build a training program that's just lifting weights to, okay, I'm going to put together all these pieces of running and conditioning, cardiovascular work and interval training and steady state work. And I'm going to figure out how to put that in the weight training side. And I'm going to manage it. Like, there's definitely a lot more pieces of the puzzle when you go that route. And I think a lot of, coaches and trainers just do what they are good at and what they enjoy doing themselves and what they know. And, there's enough social media out there that says, oh, just do 4 minutes of Tabata at the end of your workout. And
there it is. Yeah.
Just do a finisher. And, they just kind of have this idea in their mind that conditioning is like this thing you do at the end of a workout to make people tired, right? And that's just kind of the realm they go down. And the truth is too, a lot of them, I would say the majority of people in the industry are not trained high-level athletes. I mean, that's just the reality. They're training people who just want to look and feel better. So for that person, they throw in a 4 or 5 minute finisher at the end, the person's tired and like, oh yeah, great, I'm doing better. And they just kind of never have to evolve beyond that unless they're dedicated to becoming, a more complete coach, or they are starting to work with athletes that are relying on them for performance. So I think it's just kind of the nature of the people in this field. It is the fact that it is certainly more complex and requires more education, and it's the nature of who they're working with. So probably all those factors put together, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think too, it's strength, it's almost, you can go very easily into it, where I wonder if one of the common misconceptions of conditioning is it needs to be really challenging. Like you need to be going super hard and maxing out. And most people, especially general population, you want to look better, you want to feel better. You don't want to elevate your heart rate to that level. So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, I'll just do this for a couple minutes. I'll do a Tabata workout, but not actually work on progressing your conditioning. Is that one of the big misconceptions about conditioning training, is that you have to go all out all the time?
Yeah, I think that I think fortunately things are changing a bit, but I think in the last, 5, 8 years, whatever it's been since kind of the Tabata got traction of this idea that you can just get the max results in a few minutes a day. And, the highest intensity is always what's going to win. This kind of mindset permeated the fitness realm, and everyone loved the idea of oh, I only have to do a few minutes. Awesome. Let's do that. Right. And again, if you're not actually measuring things, you're not working with people whose performance counts on this, then it's easy to think, okay, the end of the workout, I'll smash them for 4 minutes and they'll get a great workout and they think they got better. But when you zoom out a bit and you realize, are you actually measuring? Did they actually get better? Is this really the right path? But, I think that kind of mindset, fortunately, is I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's definitely been a bit replaced by a lot of big people in the field, Peter Attia and Huberman and lots of others talking about zone 2 cardio, which is funny because when I first started writing online, I called it cardiac output, zone 2, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. It's longer, slower, lower intensity work done for more time, however you want to frame that. It's always been an important part of training if you want to get beyond a moderate level. And it was just kind of for a decade or whatever, people were just, no, you don't need to do that. It's going to make you slower. It's going to make you weaker. It's going to eat your muscle. It's going to increase your cortisol. It's terrible. Just do a bunch of intervals. That's all you need to do. Lift weights fast, do intervals. And I think eventually people tried that and it didn't work for very long. Eventually you get burned out. If all you're doing is smashing and dashing in the gym every day, your joints start to hurt, you get fatigued, your hormones and testosterone get out of whack eventually, your sleep, you overtrain basically because the body's not really designed for that approach. And I think enough people have cycled through the CrossFits of the world and those sorts of high intensity ideas to realize maybe you need some balance in your equation, and maybe slower, lower intensity volume zone 2 stuff actually does have a lot of benefit. And then now that you've got these big influencers and followers, or people in the industry saying the same thing, it's starting to catch a lot more traction. I actually did a Google Insight search on zone 2 cardio, and there's this massive spike in zone 2 cardio in the last couple of years of searches. So fortunately things are kind of coming back, I guess, full circle. But it's the problem with the industry, it's so trend based. This diet. No, it's that diet. No, it's this interval. No, it's that interval. No, you don't need slow cardio. Yes, you do need slow. It's just a very trend-based thing, and they catch fire in the industry, and everyone follows it. And I think we're in zone 2 cardio and cold plunge something land right now, where everyone's talking about those two things. So it's funny the way this industry is.
Exactly. Yeah. And mineral water in the morning for hydration. So
there's always something. I mean, I get it. There's always a need to try to find new things that are better. But I mean, I hate to say this, but the reality is we know what works. Get enough sleep, eat enough of the right foods in the right amounts, deal with your mental stress effectively, get in the gym consistently, do higher intensity work a couple days a week, do lower intensity, moderate the rest of the week, and be very consistent with that. And 90% of the population is not doing those things. So you don't need this secret diet or this special supplement or this crazy, regeneration method. You don't need to go dunk yourself in 2 minutes in water in some special technique if you're not getting sleep. You've got to fix the foundational things before you worry about some hack that's, a 1% difference if you did everything else dialed in, but you don't. So, It's just, it's easy to get sidetracked.
It is. Well, and I think, focusing on the micro, of that, like that 1% type thing, there's an excitement to that. It's like, oh, it's the hope. And reality is most of these trends that come on are from big influence people who have been doing a lot of the basic stuff for probably years and years down the line.
Yeah,
so like
exactly.
adding that in is going to be a little bit different. So, I mean, if you take it to kind of a conditioning 101, Joel, on it, if somebody wants to just start getting in, improving their conditioning, what's like the best approaches to just begin with? Is it starting with zone 2? Is it getting into some kind of more like high interval? Is it more of a combination of both?
Sure. So I think we got to start by defining what are we talking about when we say conditioning? Because I think that's probably that's the other challenge, right? Is like, I can say strength and people are like, oh yeah, lift weights. How much can you lift?
Yeah. But
what I can say conditioning? Like, what are you like? Okay. Is that running? Is that sprinting? Is like, what is that exactly? And that's part of the other challenge is there's not like a universally agreed upon definition of conditioning. So the way that I like to think about it and talk about it, just because I think it's important to start there, is we can look at fitness, and I look at fitness as things that we can measure within some sort of semblance of a objective measure. So we can measure strength, right? We can measure explosiveness. We can measure speed. I can measure your VO2 max, which is a measure of aerobic system. I can measure your lactic threshold. I can measure fitness qualities. We have a lot of different types of fitness qualities. I can measure mobility, right? I can measure all of these things that we would call fitness metrics. Mm-hmm. Now, to me, these are all just the tools. Conditioning is ultimately how well you can use those tools to do something. And usually for athlete, like performance, we're talking about how well can you use your fitness to go out and perform as an athlete. For your average person, it's a question of, okay, how much does your fitness translate into a healthier, longer life and the things that you're trying to be able to do on a daily basis? So to me, I like to look at it as like, okay, if I was going to build a house, I have to have all the right tools. I have to have all the right building materials. I have to have all the right things. Otherwise I can't build a house, right? That's fitness. Like I have to develop my different fitness qualities through different types of training. I develop strength by lifting weights. I develop cardiovascular fitness by doing cardio. I develop mobility by doing mobility work. But then it comes time to, can I put those pieces together to build a house? Do I actually know how to build a house? And to me, that's what conditioning is. Can I take my fitness and turn it into something that is outcome based, a longer, healthier life? Obviously, if my goal is that. Can I turn that into greater performance on the field? Can I turn that into a winning season or a championship or whatever? And that's where kind of this intersection of like how you put the pieces together of different things you do in the gym to actually translate into greater outcomes and greater results outside the gym. And so to me, conditioning isn't just a matter of like, go run some intervals or do some zone 2 cardio. Mm-hmm. To me, those are methods to develop your energy systems. So if I'm doing zone 2 cardio interval, I'm developing my aerobic system, maybe parts of my anaerobic system. If I'm lifting weights, I'm developing the strength piece. But conditioning is, again, can I put those things together to go out and perform, or to make a measurable change in my health, to make a measurable change in how I feel and the things I can do every day? So when I look at conditioning, I try to take a more holistic view than that. I think people get very focused on these minute details, like, oh, I'm doing this interval, I'm getting better condition. Well, are you? I mean, does that interval make you better at what you're trying to do? Is it actually changing your health in any measurable way? Is it actually improving your quality of life in any measurable way? Is it improving your performance as an athlete? So, again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I would just ultimately, conditioning is using fitness to accomplish whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And that's how I look at it. So that's my definition.
So for one thing that you mentioned in some of your articles is this term of dynamic energy control and kind of the awareness of these different ones. I found this fascinating. Could you describe what you mean by dynamic energy control?
So yeah, ultimately when we talk about endurance, which is like, let's be real, most people, given my broad definition, most people think about conditioning in terms of like, how long can I sustain my power? How long can I generate energy for? How long can I do my skill for? How long can I throw punches before I get tired? Or, right, how many times can I go up and down the court before I gas out? That's the way that people traditionally think about conditioning, which that is a measure of conditioning, but it happens as real to what I just said. But, in that context, it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do when you define that. And so you have to start with that and then work your way backwards in terms of what it is you're trying to build around. If that makes sense.
Okay. I'm still foggy on what so can you just elaborate on that a little bit more? I'm still foggy on what you mean by the dynamic energy control.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry. I think I missed that part to
no worries.
come back around. Sorry, I meant to come back to that part.
Yeah.
So the reason I talked about that was because we think about how long we can sustain energy production for, right?
Okay.
We think about how long we can maintain our power. Now there's two parts to that. There's one part is how much energy can my body generate and where the energy comes from. So the more energy you can generate aerobically, the longer you can sustain it for. That's just how the body works. The more we have to tap into the anaerobic side, the less time we can sustain it for, because the anaerobic side produces lots more force, lots more power, lots more energy, but it can only sustain it for very short periods of time before we get fatigue as a result. So that's one part. It's how much energy can your body generate. But then we control, essentially through our pace and through our execution of whatever we're doing, how fast we're producing the energy. In the sense of, I can control how fast I run. I can control how many punches I'm throwing in 30 seconds. I can control my pace. I can control my power output, right? I can control my own energy expenditure. And so that's where learning how much energy you can expend before you start to fatigue becomes hugely important, so that I can control my pacing effectively to where I'm not gassing myself out. So if I'm a combat athlete, it's the easiest example. There's some pace I could throw punches at forever, right? I could throw, let's say I could throw 10 punches a minute, probably forever, because that's a very slow number of punches, right? Like one punch every 2 seconds. I could do that for hours, but I probably can't throw 100 punches a minute for hours. I can probably only throw that for a couple of minutes. So ultimately, I can choose the pace of how I expend the energy. And that's where becoming aware of what pace you can go at and what pace you can't go at matters a whole lot. So it's just becoming aware of where my limits of energy production are, so I don't exceed them. And then when I do exceed them, I have to pull back. And that's one of the things that we, often mistake when we train, is we think we have to go 100% all the time. But sports and the world is not 100% all the time. It's knowing when to go 100% and when not to go 100%. It's when to go hard, when to pull back. And we see this, I see this all the time just watching fights casually these days. If you watch a combat athlete get tired, there's one or two things that athlete can do. They can start swinging away and try to knock their opponent out because they're tired. They figure they're going to go for broke. Or they can be more measured and be like, oh shit, I'm getting tired. I need to back off a bit. I need to give myself a chance to recover. I need to give myself a chance to get back into the point where I can maintain my energy again. And that's the difference between a guy who just swings for the fences and sometimes knocks the guy out and sometimes gets knocked out himself or submitted in the process, versus an athlete who steps back, is composed, gives himself a chance to recover, and then lives to continue fighting intelligently. So dynamic energy control is really just about this idea that part of how we perform, whether it's in life or sport, is managing energy effectively. And that comes from being very aware of where we're at right now, what our limits are, and how we go about using it, intelligently versus just kind of going 100% all the time. And that's where training can be such a powerful force for that. And why I use heart rate training a lot, because I can learn how to increase my heart rate up and then bring my heart rate back down, and how to dial things up and down effectively. Really what you're trying to do, if you want to get to the physiology, is you've got your sympathetic nervous system, right? Your fight or flight system, like everyone's heard of that. And what we're trying to do is crank that up when we need it and then turn it off or turn it down when we need it less, because we just can't have that system on 100%. It's fight or flight. It's not fight, flight for an hour straight. You're going to burn yourself out doing that. So it's just learning how to control yourself and learning how to pace yourself and learning how to work with what your body's capable of doing, versus this idea, again, just going 100%, because that this doesn't work in the real world for very long.
Yeah. I've spoken with some people like Derek Toshner with Strong First, of doing like snatch testing with kettlebells and practicing that slow cadence for 40 minutes or an hour, and coach on the side just telling the cadence, and you start to build that awareness of how many snatches that you can do in a certain minute, and you can just keep that pace going over and over again. Is a way to develop that does RPE come into that and just kind of understanding it, or are there better ways to track and measure that dynamic energy control?
Yeah. Look, I use heart rate, a lot of it. RPE certainly could be a part of that tool, but I'll use different methods where they have to control the heart rate at certain ranges. So even let's just give an example. Okay, someone says, I'm going to go do zone 2 cardio. Okay, great. So let's say you define what zone 2 is for that individual. Let's just say zone 2 is, 130 to 150 might be a kind of a common range of zone 2 cardio. So
what's the percentage of zone 2?
It really depends. So there's a whole other discussion, but Zone 2 cardio is really kind of just a pace where I can go out at a conversational level and I can speak while I'm going at that level. And that's going to be a different percentage for different people.
Okay. So it's going to be
and the other
subjective.
thing is, it's subjective. And well, most people, number one, the truth about heart rate training is most people don't know their true max heart rate because they don't actually do it. So they take this 220 minus age, which is a very outdated, inaccurate formula. It can be off by 10, 15 beats per minute. So when you give someone a percentage, if their max heart rate's way off, it's not really relevant. So for most people, like I said, it's going to be some pace they can maintain where they could have a conversation with someone next to them if they're going that speed. That's the easiest way they can do it. I have my own heart rate system called Morpheus, and we calculate that zone 2 for you based on either your true max that you input or based on a better formulation. But anyway, just to give you an example, let's just say you figure I can have a conversation somewhere between a heart rate of 130 to about 150. When I go over 150, I can no longer have a conversation. I start to have to stop, take a breath. That's probably too high intensity. So let's say I have this 130 to 150, right? Now, normally you say, okay, I want you to go do half an hour zone 2 cardio. Well, one way to do it would just be to kind of go out, look down your heart rate monitor or whatever, and make sure you're just kind of in that somewhere in that 130 to 150, right? That's one way. Now, what if I want to increase this ability to control things a bit better? Okay, what I want you to do is go out and hit 130 for 5 minutes. Then I want you to go up to 140 for 5 minutes. Then I want you to go 150 for 5 minutes and learn how that change in pace affects your heart rate and become more aware of that. Okay, now I want you to go 130 for 1 minute, 140 for a minute, 150 for a minute, 140 for a minute, 130 for a minute, and start to learn to go back up and down. So it's just using your heart rates as this gauge of output and then being more skilled at controlling that. So it's becoming very keenly, again, acutely aware of, okay, I'm at this power output, which is going to translate to roughly this heart rate, and learning how much you can sustain. And then you can, now let's say I go, okay, I've got that down. I'm really good at controlling my heart rate within zone 2. Now it's like, okay, well, let's go up to your anaerobic threshold. Let's just say that's 160. Okay, I want you to go up to 160 for a minute. Then I want you to drop it down to 130 as fast as you can, hold it there. So you can just use heart rate as kind of this little gamification of learning how to control different levels of power output by looking at your heart rate and seeing what you're doing. Yeah. And it's actually just a really good way to, again, what you're really doing, like I said, is you're cranking up that sympathetic nervous system and then you're cranking it back down, and you're just getting much better at controlling that output, because there's a fitness component. Obviously, if we run a certain speed, it takes a certain amount of energy, but there's also a psychological component. And the best way to think about that is people get adrenaline dumps. Well, why do you get an adrenaline dump? Well, you get an adrenaline dump because you can activate that sympathetic nervous system through mental thought. This is what mental stress is, right? I can sit here, think about something very stressful, and my heart rate goes up despite not moving, right? That is the psychological component of that sympathetic system. And when I do that, I'm burning more energy. I mean, if I sat here at a heart rate of 100 because I'm stressed out, I would burn more energy than if I sat here at a heart rate of 70 without moving, because I'm psychologically cranking up that sympathetic nervous system. So when I go out and run or do anything athletically, or even just live my life, my heart rate is controlled not just by the demands of the environment around me, but by my cognitive input into that circuitry. And so if I'm really not good at controlling that stress response and not good at being able to pull that psychological component, out as the main driver of it, then I'm going to have a much harder time controlling my heart rate. But again, part of why heart rate training and this feedback I'm talking about is valuable is because you learn that psychological input matters, and you learn how to control that a lot more when you're seeing what your heart rate's at and learning how to modulate it over time.
Yeah. I would assume, I mean, especially in a competition, like with a fighter or with, somebody who's in a high level, sport, having that psychological aspect of it, of just, those guys who get so amped up beforehand. I've always been kind of curious about that, because it's such an energy dump that you're dropping out before you even step onto the field, or, you go into the cage, where you see the ones that seem like they really have that mental performance dialed in are the ones that are very stoic before they enter it. And it's kind of that difference, it seems, between, it almost seems like mental performance is equated with mental toughness, when it's like, it seems like it's a very different thing. Yeah,
it's much more than just, again, it's the same, it's a difference between, again, my idea of conditioning is just go as hard as I can, 100%. Or my idea of conditioning is like build all these tools, learn how to put them together, for what I'm doing. It's the same thing with mental performance. It's much more about these skill sets of control and resilience and different facets of this than just, again, endure as much as you possibly can. And so there's a good example of this. There was a naval study a long time ago where they looked at basically who made it through their tough selection courses. They use like this really hard Navy divers qualification course, and it's not BUDS, but it's kind of the equivalent for naval divers, which is its own thing, right? So they have to go through a very hard selection process, and they have to go through a very hard training to get there. And they used HRV to try to understand, like, okay, what is it that helps? Like, what separates the people that get through this school successfully versus the people that burn out and don't make it, right? I mean, obviously there's psychological factors involved, and there's physical factors and all these different things, skills. And so the tool they used to measure this was heart rate variability. And what they found is that the ones who made it through most successfully had a very clear pattern where when they were in the environment that was very stressful, they could crank that system up as much as necessary. So they could turn that stress response on very high. They could get the job done, because you need that stress response when you're under an actual stressor, because that's what it's designed for. But by the same token, they could turn it off afterwards and in between, so that the body could recover from that stressor, so it could come back and do it again. The people who didn't make it through ultimately couldn't shut it off very well. And what happens is when you can't shut that stress system off, your body adapts to that by not being able to turn it on as high, if that makes sense. So if I'm chronically bombarding my body with a lot of stress, I need to be able to shut the stress off after I'm done, because if I don't, I'm just under this chronic stress. And the way the body can adapt to that is by decreasing the output. So it decreases some of the sympathetic drive. So when I need it, I don't have it anymore. I've lost that kind of top end because my body's down-regulated everything as a response to chronic stress. And so when you actually have to go perform at high level, I can't quite get to the same level because my body is down-regulated the sympathetic system's ability to do that. I can't actually produce the adrenaline I need. I don't have the receptors I need. I can't produce a force that I need. I can't have the mental focus that I need, because I burned out all the systems by being just chronically overstressed. And so I would say that's hugely important to understand, not just for performance, but for life itself, because we're all stressed. We're all living in a stressful world.
Right.
And that stress over a long period of time, if you can't shut it off, accumulates, and it causes a lot of problems with our health. It's a big contributor, obviously cardiovascular disease, to diabetes, to different cognitive decline, functional things. I mean, if you cannot shut the stress response off, or you're just chronically unable to go on the other side, which is the rest of recovery system, you end up with a lot of health problems over a long period of time. And really one of the best things exercise does for you is it helps you turn that recovery system on after exercise is over. That's one of the best parts about fitness, is it generates a parasympathetic response and a recovery response. So it's people need to understand, you don't get better in the gym. You get better when you're not training. You get better in between workouts. I don't go throw a baseball 100 times at a pitcher and then instantly I'm better. No, I go sleep and I recover, and then I come back 2 days later and now my accuracy is improved, or my pitching's improved. We improve in the in-between periods because our body devotes energy towards adapting to that stress we put ourselves under. If you don't give yourself that chance to recover, if you don't allow the body to shift into that recovery state, then I don't care how hard you worked. The gains, the improvements just aren't there because you didn't allow the body to spend the time and energy resources it needed to improve. So it's there's always both sides of that equation.
Yeah. It's tough, because when you mention that about the stress management, it seems like that's the part of the recovery process that we don't talk about as often. It's like we talk about sleep and we talk about nutrition, which are absolutely very vital, but the stress management component of it is so huge. And it's
the biggest part, honestly.
Well, and it's weird because, sometimes it feels, if you are stressed out and you feel like, how many people have said that, like, oh my God, I'm stressed out, I need to get to the gym to burn off this stress. So you want to really go and you want to push it at that time, when in reality, that could be a time when you're really susceptible for gassing out or getting an injury at that moment. I think you had a great article I read about kind of a vertical jump, where a guy was so stressed out of his mind and his vertical jump kept dropping down over and over again, and realizing like there's a missing link here in recovery. So it's interesting, with the divers, they found that kind of beautiful combination of physical stress plus the kind of emotional and psychological stress, and see how they manage that. Do you think, is it worth it for like somebody who is more general population, they want to just get healthier, kind of live for longevity, to kind of push themselves to like a max heart rate to even understand that? Or is it better just to really focus on kind of finding that zone 2 area a lot more?
There's definitely benefits to going to higher intensities at times. kind of when I zoom out and look at most athletes I've trained over my career and most people, you can do it a couple times a week, in smaller volumes, depending on the person. And there's benefits to it, but you don't need to go in the gym every single day and push yourself to max. I would say more often than not, you should walk out of the gym after workout feeling as good or better than when you walked in. If you kind of adhere to that, like most time I walk out, I feel great, you're probably on the right track. If most times you walk out of the gym feeling exhausted, you're going to beat yourself up. And the other thing is, life happens. You have to modulate your training in response to what you did or didn't do in your daily life. So if you got a bad night's sleep or 2 or 3 nights of bad sleep, if you were working super long hours and you're just mentally exhausted, or you didn't get a chance to eat the foods you should have eaten, and you went and had some drink with friends at lunch, and you're still a little drunk, like, don't go to the gym and smash yourself. Like, give yourself a chance to recover from those things before you go in the gym. So the biggest thing is, I would say, quality really matters in the gym more than people realize. Like, just going to the gym and doing something is less important than being able to go to the gym and do the things that are going to make you better. And so I'm not saying don't work out, but make sure that your workouts count. And if you've again not done the things outside the gym you need to do, it doesn't mean you can't work out, but go to the gym with a different mindset than if you have done those things. And I, 2, sometimes 3 days a week, I have people do what I call rebound workouts, and they're 30 to 40 minutes. They're lower intensity. They're meant to promote blood flow and movement and recovery. And you should walk out feeling great. And that's a part of training. That's not just like a thing you do as a what if. Like, no, that's a part of training, because I want that time spent in the gym to promote recovery, not just to promote the stress piece of it. I want to help them promote that recovery angle or end of it as well. So again, people need to recognize your life outside the gym is not disconnected from your life in the gym. They are just one extension of one another. And, if you were in a situation where you just can't get the sleep you need, and, maybe you got a baby and a newborn that's waking you up every single night, and your diet's all over the map, and, you're crushing yourself, like, use the gym as a tool to promote recovery. Don't use it as a tool to just smash yourself even further down that hole you're already in.
Yeah, it's I like that term, rebound workout. I think that's beautiful. With those workouts, do you do like some strength movements as well, or is that more like kind of cardio conditioning recovery, going at like a lighter pace?
Usually you'll go in and do a little breathing, a little dynamic warm up, just get some mobility. Usually it's like 10 to 20 minutes of cardiovascular work. Again, I like to use as many different movements as possible. Just go through different ranges of motion. It could be, I like to do low impact stuff. So, I've got a Versa climber and a bike and elliptical and rower, things that are low impact on the joints. You can run if you want to, but I like to use just lower impact stuff. And in that zone 2 range is a pretty good range to do that. And then a couple exercises from the strength standpoint. If you really want to, again, kind of depends on where you're coming from, but 2 or 3 reps of a heavy deadlift, like 2 sets, can just get the nervous system activated to promote a bit of recovery. And then as long as it's, again, a low volume, like you're not going there and doing 10 sets of 2 max effort reps, but a couple sets of, 85, 90% deadlift, couple sets, again, couple reps here and there can help turn that nervous system on. So you can throw some lifts in there to promote blood flow. Things like the sled are great because there's no essential component there. You can do stuff. This is where I think blood flow restricted training can play a role, because you can use really light weight and still drive lots of blood flow in there. You can do e-stim, there's lots of little tools here and there you can use to promote recovery. But again, for the most part, just get in, move, get some blood flow, and then, move around a bunch and leave within that 30 to 40 minute time frame.
Yeah. So with all the work and the research and the programs that you've done with conditioning, is there still any part of conditioning that you feel like you still want to learn more about or don't know as much about? Is there something like just in general that as a whole, as coaches, we still don't understand about conditioning?
No, I mean, I think that there's always more to learn, right? Like I'm digging into a lot of areas around mitochondrial function and how the different methods are impacting them, and how a lot of aerobic function. I mean, 90% of it comes down to mitochondrial performance, more or less, or mitochondrial health, and that translates into health. There's lots of really interesting stuff, how the immune system integrates with it, how all these different facets play out in the real world. It's fascinating. I think, to me, what I always enjoy doing is picking a new sport, because what you basically realize over time is the different sports and different people are all unique in and of themselves. So, I've got tons of experience with combat sports and lots of different team sports, and I've worked with really kind of random ones like roller derby and ultimate frisbee and Cirque du Soleil performers here and there. So to me, it's more about, okay, how do I apply what I know to some completely unrelated demand or some unrelated sport or some unrelated goal that I've never worked with before? Because ultimately that's where it's like, okay, how do I reinvent what I know and apply it to something totally different? And that's kind of what I really enjoy these days, is finding unique challenges. But I think, look, most people, like I said, in the general population realm, it's more about just finding the consistency of, okay, I get in the gym twice a week. I work really hard. The other days I'm going to do lower intensity stuff and promote recovery. I need to figure out how to get my sleep dialed in. I need to figure out how to manage my mental stress, figure out a diet plan that works for me. Like, it's these big things that most people need to figure out. It's not these super complicated, nuanced things that we need to explore and dive into. That's, cutting edge. Like, most people don't need that at all. They just need the basics down. And I'm talking about a lot of pro athletes in the same category. Like, as much as we love to think that pro athletes are like these superhuman people that need these really complex programs and these crazy training strategies, and always recovery modalities, they're just people. A lot of them eat like shit and don't get enough sleep. Like, it's just the way it is. Like, if you know a pro baseball player who's on the road for, half of their life in the course of a season, a lot of them do not eat particularly well. They go after game, they have a bunch of beers, and then they, get up in the morning and don't do the things they should do to get ready for a game. Like, people are still people, whether they're pro athletes or not. So I don't want to downplay the importance of high level performance. It's certainly there, but in my experience, more often than not, I can get better gains by fixing the simple things that have the biggest impact than trying to go down this rabbit hole, some super crazy, complicated recovery modality, or doing this new thing that's out there that people are talking about. Like, great, do that, talking about that after you've got everything else squared away, because most people just don't, is the reality of it.
Yeah, I remember. I think when I talked with Pat Davidson, he said it's like, instead of thinking outside the box, just aggressively think inside the box and know every single angle of it, and you're going to know everything that you need. It's interesting with pro athletes. I mean, we glamorize it so much because, in a lot of them, they're just very good at maybe one very specific skill that gets them to that level. But baseball specifically, it's, the travel of playing every day, and
it's crazy.
You're going from standing around doing nothing to all of a sudden you're going into the most violent movement in all of sports of trying to swing a bat. It's no wonder they all have oblique issues, all the time from the movement. But
yeah, exactly. It's, the other thing I would just say is, for the average person, like, every one of us is different. We are really just the products of our genetics, interact with our environment throughout our entire lifetime. And we all have different genetics and we all have different environments. We all end up being very different human beings from a physiological standpoint, and we react differently to different things. So, it kind of comes back to the idea that, like, okay, here's the one diet that works for everybody. Like, bullshit. There isn't one diet that works for everybody. There isn't one training program that everybody should be following. There isn't one way to do anything that everyone's always going to respond positively to. And even research, when the research reports like, oh, the Tabata group got X percentage improvement, well, that just means that's the average. There could have been 3 people who lost performance. There could have been 8 people that gained performance. Right. And the net was a positive. But what about those 3 suckers who didn't get better? Like, those 3 people got worse. I'm not saying that's not study, but we tend to look at these research papers, or we look at these like outcomes and forget that, like, that's not what everybody got. That's the average. And so the biggest thing I've learned over my career, and especially using things like HRV, is we're all different and we respond differently to different things. And if you want to invest in one thing, it's learning how your body responds to these different things and how you can build these different habits into your own lifestyle and how you can find the path forward. And I'm not saying you can't use other people's experience or other people's programs or other people's ideas to learn that. That's what you should learn. You should use those as, tools to start from or ideas to try. But, you can't just copy and paste someone else's lifestyle or someone else's workout or someone else's whatever and expect it to be the right answer for you. So I think that's where, what this ultimately comes down to is coaching, is understanding that each person that you work with is their own unique challenge, and they have their own unique things that you've got to be aware of, that you learn, working with them over time, that we can't just kind of put everybody in the same box and apply the same methods and think they're going to get the same results, because you're not. You're all, everyone you work with is different. And that's one thing I would just stress above all else, whoever's listening to this, you're unique, you're different, and you're never going to solve the problems of your own fitness without treating it as your unique problems or your unique challenges to figure out, and just kind of copying and pasting a workout you found online, or copying and pasting a diet that someone else is doing and works great for them, or copying and pasting some supplement that someone's doing. Like, great, try those things, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is to figure out the right combination that works for you and your unique biochemistry and physiology. And if you can figure that out, everything else is going to fall into place.
Yeah. That's perfect closeout right there, Joel. Joel, really appreciate you taking the time today. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for a while, and I love the work that you're doing, and be able to speak to you and dive into these things is a real honor. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to come on and talk to your audience, and hope everyone listening finds it valuable. And they can always jump over, you to, like I said, 8 weeks out. It's a place to find me and what I've been up to.
Perfect. Awesome. And then you've got Morpheus, you've got Metamorphosis, a lot of programs right on that same website, right?
Yep, lots of stuff on there. Like I said, Morpheus is my HRV and heart rate training platform, and then Metamorphosis is general population conditioning program, and I got lots more in the work. So that's it's always my challenge is how do I give people what I just said, or this individualized approach, but still, I can't write individualized programs, and that's where using technology like Morpheus makes that kind of stuff possible when I'm working on.
Perfect. Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes. Listeners, go check out Joel, check out his stuff. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.